I'm Erica Lukes, host of UFO Classified. For me, life isn't simply black and white. Life is full of many unknowns. It is my goal to travel the world and to work with the world's leading experts in the hopes of making groundbreaking discoveries. Join me on UFO Classified Friday nights at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, only on KCOR.
UFO Classified. UFO Classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Happy Fantopia Friday and welcome to UFO Classified. I'm always thrilled to be here with a group of very intelligent people who are listening from all over the world. It's been very interesting as of late because I've been shining a spotlight on some questions that I have with regard to TTSA, with regard to Skinwalker Ranch, with the motivation of a certain handful of individuals who have been manipulating this subject for decades. And the trolls have come out in full force, of course, making lovely comments on YouTube and all sorts of things. So you know you must be living right when you get all the trolls that are attacking. I truly believe that there is something critical for all of us to understand. And I have been very fortunate that I am finding people that are aligned with my beliefs on this, and people who have been doing a lot of research over the years to try to put forth the truth. And unfortunately, it's not the truth that I wanted. I wanted, benevolent extraterrestrial beings to land, and we could sing Kumbaya and do all sorts of things, but that's not the case. And I think, unfortunately, what I've been learning is the UFO narrative has been used by the intelligence agencies to conduct covert operations and to steer a narrative that isn't necessarily in our best interests, and we need to look at that. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about Elaine Douglas, who was a former state director of Utah MUFON, and you've heard me mention her on my shows before because she was a person that I took over for, and she felt towards the end of her life that her life was in danger, and she was concerned about MUFON. She was concerned about some of the work that she was doing, I think, with regard to Bigelow, and I also believe that she was stumbling onto a lot of things that were taking place here in Utah that were perhaps military tests. It is very interesting because I've been turning to the work of James Carrion, who has not really released a lot publicly lately. He did an interview with Paul Kimball, and you can find that on YouTube. I'm posting a link to that, and I want to read you just a little bit of what he had to say because I find it fascinating, and it goes hand in hand with some of the things we're going to talk to my guest about tonight. But during this conversation, Carrion was, during his time as executive director, he wanted to get access to Skinwalker Ranch. And he was denied that access, but he went up there and conducted some interviews around the property with Junior Hicks. And Junior Hicks had discovered some rods next to a mutilated cow. And the scientist, quote unquote scientist, that was involved with Bigelow told Junior that it likely had something to do with element 115. James Carrion was concerned about this because he understood that the element 115, the Bob Lazar story, that was actually a huge farce, and he was concerned about this information being passed on to Junior. Carrion also interviewed people that were involved and lived at the ranch before Bigelow bought the ranch, and lo and behold, from what he gathered, there was actually nothing to support the claims of the paranormal there. In the Elaine Douglas files, there is a specific reference to somebody trying to browbeat the Shermans into saying that there was paranormal activity, or actually, and let me go back and I'll read you that over the break. It was very interesting. So there is a narrative here, but he also said, this is from the interview. I began a question. What's really happening if you take all of these things together? He's referring to the Bob Lazar and the MUFON experience. One could form a circumstantial argument, at least, that would say that what has been reported at Skinwalker Ranch is not accurate. You might even be able to go on as far, and I certainly know a number of skeptics who would say it was all made up for whatever reason is a possibility. Do you think really well that there, let's see, and this is translated, I think that there is something going on. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Somebody is trying to convince the general public that this area is a high concentration of paranormal activity. I'm not sure for what reason, and maybe it's just because, let's just hypothesize, your U.S. government involvement here, and they want to publicize one thing, that they're contributing to the UFO myth, and that there might actually, the actual activity on the ranch is not paranormal, but is more terrestrial in nature, along the lines of non-lethal weapons testing or drug-induced mind manipulation. Who knows what we could possibly be doing, what is possibly happening at the ranch, where all of these strange characters are showing up, including folks from various intelligence agencies. So here you have Carry On, who was quite brave to come on the record and state some things, raise some questions about the whole UFO narrative. And I want to say, if you get a second, definitely look into his work. He's a very controversial figure, but more and more I'm finding what he has to say is really critical to what we're learning. Tonight, my guest is somebody that I have been in contact with. We've had an interesting relationship over the past half a decade, but I really respect the work that he's done. He's done great work on the Cash Landrum case, which is an important case. We're going to talk about that now. His new article with Roger Glazell, The Pentagon UFO Program's Secret Partner, is again another critical article for all of you to read. You can find that at blueblurrylines.com. Curt is the author behind Blue Blurry Lines. The website focuses on the UFO mystery as well as legends and hoaxes. After his career in retail management, he began writing about UFOs with a special interest in the 1980 Cash Landrum case that took place in Texas. In 2015, he was on the investigative team for the Roswell Slides research group that exposed the Bee Witness alien photo fiasco. And more recently, he's launched The Saucers That Time Forgot with Claude Falkstrom, focusing on unearthing tales that UFO history is overlooked or would rather forget. He lives near Jackson, Mississippi. I want to just say, Curt, we've had an interesting relationship, but I'm really happy that we're talking again.
Yeah, we've had our differences, and I think part of it came from your relationship with MUFON. So, anyway,
yes, but it's great because honestly, I mean, there were some interesting things that were games that were at hand and different learning. I mean, I had to go through a big learning curve, and that was something that I think you guys had already been experiencing, and you were looking at the Roswell Slides fiasco in a completely different way, because I was working for MUFON and I drank the Kool-Aid and I tried to do the best I could, but I understand now why that some certain things played out the way they did. But I'm very happy that you and I are talking, because you've done really critical work as of late, and I cannot thank you enough for your latest article.
Well, I appreciate that. You mentioned the learning curve. I'm sort of a Rip Van Winkle in ufology. I was very big into it as a child, probably up into my teens, and then I went to work and school and pretty much dropped out of it. And I was, the closest I got to UFOs for a long time was X-Files episodes, and I did recognize some of the UFO activity in that as things that were drawn from real UFO history. But it was 2011 before I got back into ufology proper. So I missed all of this episode with MUFON that was so contentious that we'll be discussing. So I learned it secondhand. I've with Roger's help, we connected with the people involved and really have done some detective work to bring this to light.
And that's really interesting. It's funny, when I was in contact with Dr. Eric Davis, who we know has a long association with Bigelow, he actually, voiced his concern about Roger and a few other researchers, and said that he felt that they were with the GRU.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just like, okay. I mean, and now that I look back on that, it's probably because Roger actually has the courage, as do several other people, to dig into things, and to, when something's not right, to stand up and ask questions about that.
Well, that's true. And Roger's asking questions in all sorts of directions. He has been, since the story of ATIP was first released, and there was a Pentagon statement. He wanted to find more information, and I think I played a little part in that. I said, you write for. I don't think at that time he had written a UFO article, but he has since written for UFO. I'll probably blow the name, UFO Aktuelt, and that's a Swedish magazine, and he has continued to contact the Pentagon spokespersons, in which there's sort of been a revolving door. I think we're on our third one now, and has gotten statements. And one of the first things he did was, he didn't mean necessarily to expose the OSAP, which was the original name of the program, but he had to ask a question of them that required him to define it. It may have been trying to verify whether one of the Eric Davis documents that had leaked was genuine. It was figured in the question somehow, but their answer directly addressed it. And so I encouraged him to write an article about it. We put it on the Blue Blurry Lines website, and that's when all of a sudden George Knapp was forced to talk about OSAP, and of course he had that paperwork all along, and just chose to withhold it for whatever reason, to maybe string along the story and release bits at a time. I don't know. So that's really how I got started with Roger in this. Now, we'd worked together before in the Roswell Slides group, and were had a good working relationship. And I was there. I really saw the kind of dedication he had and tenacity in investigating. And he initiated this project. And as it happens, I'm self-unemployed. He works as a information technology person and has a full-time job, so he's only got a few hours to devote. So when it came time to write things up or do some background checks and fact checking and whatnot, I had the time to do that. So it's a partnership on that basis.
And that's wonderful. I mean, it really is. This article is pretty incredible, and I think it's important because a lot of people coming into the subject, I mean, you want to, you turn to the Stars, or you turn to Luis Elizondo or Tom DeLonge and some of these people to get information, or MUFON, probably not so much anymore. They've lost a lot of their appeal, but I think that, you turn to these people and you don't understand the history, and people aren't looking at the person behind the facade, because when you really step back and you look at Hal Puthoff, you look at some of the connections he's had over the decades, you look at all of these people, and John Alexander, and some of what his thrust is non-lethal weapons technology, and some of these things. It's like you have to do your due diligence in all of this, because as you know, it's a big murky rabbit hole.
It is, and the cast of characters that you mentioned. I feel behind here because I'm not sure what you've talked about and how familiar your listeners are. But John Alexander's Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group was sort of a model for some of the things that came later, and in that, the language of it was a UFO study group, but he had this kind of deceptive name, and he avoided putting any documents out there so that Freedom of Information Act requests wouldn't have anything to there would be nothing to be produced. So that was, there was some sneakiness there, and the people that were involved, Hal Puthoff and Jacques Vallée was involved, at least on the peripheral sense of that, and Dr. Bob Wood from MUFON, Kit Green, I think, was in and out of it, but it was this same cast of characters, and many of those had been involved earlier in remote viewing programs for the government, and after that they were involved in Robert Bigelow's National Institute for Discovery Science, which ran from about, what was that, about 95 to 2004 when they shut down.
And so can you, because I think that it'd be good, because a lot of, I've got listeners that are new to the subject and people that are pretty well-versed, but it would be good to go over this advanced theoretical working group and talk about when that was formed and who was specifically, you mentioned Woods and a few of those people, but give us a little bit more detail on that if you wouldn't mind.
Well, now all the names, I don't have an instant recall, but as I recall, I think they began meeting in 1985, and as it stated, they were described as one of the things they wanted to do was find out, okay, now this was, I should say, back up a little bit. So John Alexander was with the Army, and as you said, was involved in non-lethal weapons research and development. Some of the other people were military contractors, like Dr. Bob Wood with McDonnell Douglas. And I think Bart Rutan was in some of the meetings too, and he was that Lockheed? I'm gone blank on that. But so a high caliber group of people.
And I will go back and I'm just reading through your article to see.
Well, with what the purpose of the group, they said they were going to begin by seeing who was in control. They said who's watching the store. I think is what they said. They wanted to find out if there was a UFO organization that was in charge of the investigating UFOs and controlling the information, whereas everyone that kind of got a whiff of what they do, and they thought that was it. But these same people have been involved in so many things, and they did investigate even the Cash Lantern case, reviewed that, and I think the partnership they put together, and I think they were the basis for what was referred to as the aviary, that Bill Moore was talking about. His nickname for them, he had bird names, nickname for them, Condor and Falcon and such as that. And but it was really NIDS that was the first thing that Robert Bigelow was involved in. And Bigelow, I'm sure you've talked about him, but I'm sure your listeners know that he was a billionaire in the aerospace industry, and he had a UFO interest. And he's also considered something of a ruthless businessman. So, and one of the things he seems to do is sometimes fund UFO information, and sometimes it disappears.
Most of the time it disappears, which I think is very interesting. And in having talked with several people who worked at Bigelow Aerospace, to me it would appear that Bigelow Aerospace is kind of a front for something else, because there was actually a lot of his things were held together by duct tape. It's there a lot of, if you go to Glassdoor reviews, you can see former employees that talk about the lack of professionalism and about some of the mass firings that were taking place. And so I really truly believe the money that he amassed, it was in his property dealings and some of the acquisitions he made over the years. And with the Skinwalker Ranch thing, I believe he was the landlord of that property, and had contractors come in and do the weapons testing in a real life scenario. And there's a lot of evidence to back that up. But it is interesting. Bigelow is definitely a shady character who's had a lot of, thanks to people like George Knapp, you have this big promotion marketing team who are creating a myth, and then there's a lot more behind the scenes that people aren't truly understanding. And, like you said, when you look at John Alexander and his background and some of the other people and their background, I don't know. Do you truly think that they were really looking at UFOs?
Well, we only have their side of the story, so I really can't say. But you can't help but think that it's strange. And what were the goals of things? And when we move into the story about the OSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System program, its stated goal is developing aircraft technology, but it's got the W in their name for weapons, so we have to consider that. And what was the true goal and what was the cover story? It's hard to differentiate.
Absolutely. And so, I want to get a little bit, we'll talk deeper about that, and also, really get into your article, the MATE team, who consisted of some interesting people as well with very diverse backgrounds. And also, we'll talk a little bit about your work with Cash Landrum. That'll be later in the show because, as you've mentioned, John Alexander showed up, Schuessler showed up for the Cash Landrum investigation, and they were hanging around on the periphery. And so these are all interesting connections to make between people that always seem to be there.
Well, it's good that you started talking about James Carrion, because he's a main character in this story. He was the director of MUFON at the time that all of this started, and he wound up resigning right at the end of it. So that's the period that's under investigation primarily. So and and we've been fortunate that he's provided some substantial comments on what's been going on, and he's commented on the documents that have been released, and verifies that this is accurate. So very useful in putting this story all together.
Yeah, I'll never forget. We've got to get ready to take a break, but I'll never forget. I was at my first MUFON symposium, and that must have been 2014, back east, and James Carrion showed up. And I just remember, the look on Jan Harzan's face, the look on all of, everybody's face. It was like, it was like, okay, everyone get ready to bend over. It was a very interesting moment. And because I had only heard that James Carrion was the devil in disguise, I was just like, wow, okay. But as I began kind of researching, and then he had a wonderful blog out there that kind of flew under the radar, and I'm not sure if it's still up. I don't think it is. But, you start reading and start seeing that he was asking some really critical questions. And at the end of the day, I'm absolutely sure that he was railroaded into and basically discredited by certain people at MUFON.
I told you about when I came in late on things, and when I saw some of his articles, I thought, well, this guy's a disgraced MUFON ex-director, and he's basically a disgruntled employee, and all this complaining that he's doing is biased. Well, now that we have all the facts and check it out, he was, he may have been strong in his opinions, but his facts are right. So, it's just a shame that more evidence didn't come out at the time. But, if there's something to take to court, we have the evidence now.
And that's so important. And I want to just let our listeners know you can go to blueblurrylines.com. You can read the new article written by my guests, Curt Collins and Roger Glazell, the Pentagon UFO Program's secret partner. This gives you a great timeline and gives you some information that has not been put forward. I also want to encourage you to check out Keith Basterfield's excellent work. There are some great people that are working really hard. Also, Jack Brewer. I'm really fortunate to know all of you, because I think with all of us putting our heads together, we can come up with some amazing things. So we're going to take a break, and we will be back.
Stand by. This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes. The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Do you love new music? Yeah! Then tune in to the Americana Music Radio Show, Sundays at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, from the West Coast to the East Coast, and everywhere in between. Your host, Charles Christian, will introduce you to the artists both old and new, the Americana Music Radio Show. where we showcase new local talent, as well as international artists, as well as showing you where Americana music is happening and who's making it happen, both here in the U.S. and around the world. The Americana Music Radio Show, hosted by your musical aficionado, Charles Christian, every Sunday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Now, broadcasting in digital HD radio.
In the shadows, a voice cries out. Evidence that you're not alone.
You said my name. What is your name?
Proof that the living and the dead coexist. Or do they? Every Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, join writer, producer, and paranormal investigator Greg Bakken on Ghost Box Radio as he explores, interviews, and investigates evidence alongside some of the best in the paranormal community and beyond.
6 people killed.
Ghost Box Radio, Wednesday nights exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, because the dead don't sleep. Ghost Box Radio.
We interrupt to bring you this.
Would you like to advertise on KCOR Digital Radio Network?
This is what I'm talking about.
At a fraction of the cost of traditional radio advertising, why not?
Tell them the good news.
Whether you need to promote your next book, product, or service, we can customize a package for just about any budget.
Finally, there is hope for the hopeless.
Why limit yourself to a tiny local market when KCOR can brand you to the world?
Here's all you do.
Visit KCORradio.com or contact our sales department by email at saleskcorradio.com.
We want it now!
See the difference with us by letting us work for you.
This ain't reality TV!
The KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Are you ready to go?
It's showtime!
Here we go, world.
You're listening to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Broadcasting from the heart of Las Vegas, Nevada.
Their base is so large it has to draw most of its power from the nearby nuclear fusion plant.
The future of radio is here and now.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to UFO Classified. I want to thank all of my listeners for supporting the show. If you care to support my show, please go to UFOclassified.com. I am very grateful for all of the people who take time to share information about my show and also to support it. It means the world to me, and I certainly couldn't be here, especially given now, unfortunately, some of the things that are taking place in the world with the coronavirus. And being a small business owner, it's definitely a scary time. My thoughts and prayers go out to all of you, and I know that we can get through this together, and I'm glad that I have my family here on Friday nights that we can talk and go over things and think about some really complex subjects. I am here with Curt Collins, who is the author behind Blue Blurry Lines. You can go to blueblurrylines.com, and that is a website that is focused on the UFO mystery, legends, and hoaxes. He's just recently, with Roger Glazell, written the article, The Pentagon, UFO Program's Secret Partner. This is something that you have to read and share this as much as you can. When we left for break, we were talking a little bit about James Carrion, and Curt, you were mentioning that when you first started looking at him, because you had come into this in 2011, it almost seemed as though he was a disgruntled person that was just complaining. And that's what I thought as well, because I was getting all of this information from people at MUFON, surprise, surprise, but actually James was trying to get information out there and shine a spotlight on an organization with questionable intentions.
That's true. And it's, I pulled my microphone. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was really surprised at when I engaged him, because, as it happens, I had first, I was backup co-host on a Paracast interview when he was talking about his book, and really that was the first time I engaged him. That was 2015, and he was, it was the Roswell deception. And, I thought, well, this guy really knows what he's talking about. I don't necessarily agree with his interpretation of UFO history, but he put together this amazingly well-documented series of events, and his premise is that there was this UFO deception going on, that the military was using this, and he cites some known cases and says this is the techniques that they use. We can't necessarily prove that this UFO event was the same kind of thing, but it matches the backstage doing. So, and I thought, well, even if he's wrong about all that, this is an incredible presentation of history, and it's intelligently presented. So, I gained some respect from him with that encounter.
And that's good to know. It's really good to know. And I just want to encourage people to definitely go out and look at James Carrion. He has a few lectures online. You can find some things, but definitely look into that. And so let's get into your new article and really talk about the timeline and some of the people that are involved in this story.
Well, we're going to, there's more than we'll be able to talk about, but we'll hit some points, and you ask about any details that you think I've skipped. But we started in 2008, and curiously, Robert Bigelow had started this company called Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Space Studies, and that was in December of 2007, I'm sorry. And then in 2008, the Department of the Defense Intelligence Agency put together this organization called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. And they put out a bid. They wanted an aerospace company to come in and do some work for them, to develop these 12 areas of aerospace propulsion. And it was lift, and there was a stealth aspect to it, and and all these but it was on conventional aerospace type terms, but they were wanting like future performance, and so it was tailor made for Robert Bigelow's company, but somehow he already had a separate subset of his company ready to do that. So it kind of looks like there was some behind the scenes arrangement to custom make these two things for one another. So he was the sole bidder for the contract, and he was up and running, and within days he was on Coast to Coast Radio with George Knapp talking about not the military contract certainly, but his own UFO research that he would be doing in broad strokes, that he would be trying to find partners to provide information. And one of those partners, the chief partner at that time, was the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, which had been around since 1969, and had their slogan was, well, you know the slogan, right? The scientific investigation of UFOs for the benefit of mankind or humanity, something like that.
Yeah, they might want to get a new one.
So the way that happened, and by the way, John F. Schuessler, who was an aerospace engineer for McDonnell Douglas, working for Johnson Space Center and NASA, and that's kind of interesting because when he describes his work, he doesn't say he worked for NASA, which is a government entity. he actually worked for McDonnell Douglas. McDonnell Douglas contracted with the United States for government, for NASA. So he does not technically work for NASA or the government, but without the government and NASA, he has no job. So that's kind of the same relationship Bass had with the government. If this program didn't exist, that Bass doesn't exist, and MUFON, is not involved in it. So there's a chain there, and it has to do with the contract and the money. But I mentioned John Schuessler. He was the co-founder of MUFON. The former executive director, he stepped down and James Carrion took over. However, he was on the board of directors and basically had a fatherly position in the organization, a lot of influence. And he had been, we mentioned briefly, the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS. John Schuessler was a part of that, as well as being part in MUFON. He was on the science board. I don't know what his actual duties were, if it was just consulting, but Robert Bigelow calls John Schuessler and says, I want you to do this research. And as James Carrion was told later, he disclosed who his backer was, but John Schuessler kept that in confidence, and he said he has other partners. And I'm not sure what the other people in MUFON thought, if it was another aerospace partner like Lockheed or someone they just contractually couldn't reveal because of some sort of non-disclosure agreement. But they did not know, aside from John Schuessler, that it was the government. So they had a series of negotiations, and those papers that OSAP, the government, asked Bigelow to write, he asked MUFON to write. And so he was, by this time he's under time pressure. I think he had to produce something to show that, that their money was yielding results. So within a month's time, MUFON, under the MUFON Advanced Technology Establishment, which was Bob Wood and Robert Powell and some other names that I've forgotten, but all prominent MUFON members with science backgrounds, they put together these papers, which were, by the way, requested not to use overt UFO terminology. So, it was the general aviation, so it was disguised for whatever reason. And that's unclear. Like I said, it's hard to tell the cover story from the genuine purpose. But before I drift too far from that, so what Robert Bigelow's story to MUFON was that he wanted them to give him information that would help him basically duplicate UFO flight and propulsion to further his company's aerospace developments. So that's what they were told, and it seemed to accept and sincerely believe. So they produced the papers, they delivered them, and for that it was really a good deal for a little struggling UFO organization. They were paid $10,000 for these 5 papers, and 4 of them are kind of thin. They're not. There's not a lot of substance. There's only one that's really meaty and scientific. But he was satisfied with that, and immediately. Now it takes a little strange turn. He doesn't ask for the other papers to round out the 12. Instead, he switches, and again, this was not overt UFO material, but the next step definitely was. He wanted them to conduct UFO field investigations. They were just building something called the STAR team, where they would be a rapid response for important cases to go out and collect physical evidence if there was any. And so MUFON wanted to back this and staff it in a substantial way. He wanted 24/7 investigators able to travel across the country, and was eventually, after several weeks of negotiation, set up payments of MUFON in the amount of $56,000 a month, which was huge for them. And this allowed them to have salaried investigators, travel expenses, and even things like incentive bonuses for exceptional performance. And MUFON quickly became, well, it's like if you went into a little restaurant and, you had a factory next to it, and you said, well, you're going to be the commissary for our factory. And so all of a sudden they have to ramp up their organization and have extra cooks and food and refrigerators and everything else to accommodate the business. So MUFON radically restructured in order to fulfill this contract. And, and that, I don't want to get ahead of the story there, but okay, so what do we need to examine here before we move on? I don't want to rush the story.
No, and I want to just say that it is really interesting to go back to the point that they were first instructed, Bob Wood, Robert Powell, when they were writing the papers, not to necessarily reference UFOs. Is that perhaps because the contract had absolutely nothing to do with UFOs? That would be my guess.
That's the mystery. So what we actually, due to some paperwork that's leaked out, the man's name has not been announced, but Dr. James Lakatsky, I think it is, he was the original program director before, and everyone's heard of Luis Elizondo. He came in later, and apparently he was the one that wrote this. And from the hints we get from interviews with Senator Harry Reid, who is said to have set up the program, the Lakatsky, the director, said that he would set the program up and use scientific language that would basically make it acceptable for the Pentagon and the budget and everything else, that they would be spooked if it was UFOs. So.
And where is that specific quote? Where did he say that?
Let's see. Since that was sort of beyond the scope of the article, I have that and can lay my hands on it, but it's not it's not in there. But it's. I know one of the places is in a George Knapp interview, and there's been a few. So, but there was another one in a mainstream article where they talked about a few things beyond that. But I can track that down for you.
That would be wonderful, because I think that's that would be interesting to actually find out who the sources were that are saying Lakatsky said this, because again, I feel and the evidence supports the fact that this has nothing to do with UFOs, and the Bigelow boys are trying to push that narrative for their own reasons, which we'll have to figure out as the days progress. But it is interesting. Without that regard. And I want to also talk about the fact that we know Bigelow was by different people that have worked with him. He's very frugal. And so for him to just, to give this, allocate $56,000 a month to MUFON is interesting. And also, I have interviewed several people who worked in the upper echelon of MUFON during this time frame, and they were stating that even though they were supposed to be the elite going out and investigating, being on call 24/7, that sometimes when there were really big reports coming in, that they would actually get there and all the evidence had been taken, and they believed it was by other MUFON or other BASS investigators. And I want to really quickly, and then I'll let you wrap it up because we're going to go to break in 5 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about a man by the name of Gary Hernandez, who stepped in when Michael Lee Hill had all of his sightings. And basically from reports that I have now been gathering, and I'll get more information out on that, allegedly Gary Hernandez was basically the man in black. And so he was sent out allegedly to interview people that had had UFO sightings and to collect their photos and videos by perhaps, by using some, allegedly, again, I'm going to throw that in there, some interesting tactics. And it was stated to me from a person who interviewed Hernandez that Hernandez said that when there was a sighting and it was related to government testing, that's when he would be sent in to collect, to sweep up the data. And in this carry-on interview that I'm referencing to, and I can't wait for you to listen to it, Curt, he was mentioning a fellow that was out on Utah Lake, and he had a sighting, and he took a photograph of this UFO, and it submitted it to MUFON, and lo and behold, that was swept under the rug like you couldn't believe, because this man was actually photographing an experimental aircraft. And so it just gets better and better all the time. And I really, truly, now looking back at things, I think that MUFON is simply just collecting all of the evidence and trying to suppress it. And I'm not sure what it has to do with UFOs, but you had mentioned that, you have the funding and all of these things moving in one direction and nothing's coming back in our direction.
That's right. There's so I was likening it to a government contract where they have a manufacturer of aircraft, and in this case, it's UFO information. So OSAP, this program, hires Bigelow. Bigelow hires MUFON as a subcontractor to produce the information he's asked for. He's outsourced it, is what the term usually is. So the information flows to him, back to the government, and there's no other exchange of information. All they get in return is money. And I kind of jumped ahead. Let me know when we're out of time, but I wanted to say I skipped over one step. So as Bigelow was having this MUFON program set up, this ties into what you were saying about Gary Hernandez. He also set up a BASS, which is Bigelow Aerospace Space Studies, that's BASS, set up about 50 scientists and technicians and some investigators, and they were to analyze whatever MUFON found. They would produce it, MUFON would produce it, he would study it. But also, some of the BASS personnel went out and co-investigated. Sometimes they scooped the investigations. So I kind of liken it in that part to MUFON's STAR team was kind of like the beat cops, and then the BASS people were like either the cops in the CSI or the FBI. They would come in and scoop the truly important stuff up and take over.
And that is a great way to look at it. I think that's absolutely what was going on. And I have to wonder if that's still not going on in some capacity, because it's just, the whole thing is incredible. And we're getting ready to go to break, and I want people to understand, and when you go to Blue Blurry Lines, you'll be able to see the requirements for the OSAP, the contractor bid. And it specifically says on here, one aspect of the future threat environment involves advanced aerospace weapons system application. And the objective of the program is to understand the physics and engineering of these applications as they apply to the foreign threat out to far term. And some of the things that they were looking at: lift, propulsion control, power generation, spatial temporal translation, materials, configuration, structure, signature reduction, optical, infrared, radio frequency, acoustic, human interference, human effects, armament, RF, and do. So human effects, armament, RF, and do, those are two key points to really stress as to what truly is going on. And it's just so interesting. So, I mean, Curt, we've got, a couple minutes before break, but I just want to ask you, when you started digging into this, were you surprised at what you were finding?
Well, absolutely. And those 12 areas, we first, what's been so frustrating in all this, when the story came out, it was so piecemeal. There was in the New York Times story, there was like one line about Robert Bigelow that had hired subcontractors, and the New York Times story had the videos, and that was what dominated everyone's attention. What are these Navy UFO videos? And so no one really paid much attention to that. I wrote a little article at the time about what MUFON, what Robert Bigelow had done, because I knew about the MUFON connection, and I found out that he had also done some things like he had bought UFO information in Canada. And so this, there were a few other things going on, but our focus here was on the MUFON deal, because this is what the paperwork is on. And that list of 12 things that you just read, that translated from from OSAP at the federal, the military level, through BASS on to MUFON. And then when MUFON, after he had the file from MUFON, he took it to someone else. He had Hal Puthoff work on those same 12 topics. And they, over the next 2 years, they produced a series of 38 papers. And we've got only a few of those. Eric Davis, you've talked to him about I think he wrote 2 of them. Mm-hmm. And Kit Green wrote one. And Kit's is interesting because all this language was disguised, but his was the only one that apparently directly references UFOs, because it's basically about human injuries, and it touches on the Cash Lantern case, and in fact uses it kind of as the benchmark to compare some of the others.
And here is an interesting thing, and I want to just say this because I know that in Tim McMillan's article and in subsequent interviews that he's done, he says that, Kit Green was the only person that referenced UFOs. And it has been interesting because in Keith Basterfield's blog, Kit Green is on the record saying that he felt none of the injuries that were sustained had anything to do with UAP or UFOs. And so Tim McMillan is the one who's really putting this out there. And if you go through and look at Kit Green's report, research paper, there are not that many references a handful to UFOs. And so you could look at this as an intelligent person and say, wait a minute, Kit Green is not talking about UFOs, he's talking about terrestrial technology. And that is what is causing the injuries to all of these people all over the world. And I that's a really important point I want to get into a little bit more when we get back from break, because that, to me, when I look at the work of Tim McMillan and some others that are coming out and saying things, I have to question the integrity of that, because it's simply not what Kit Green has stated on the record, and so forth. So anyway, thank you for letting me vent. I feel much better now, Curt.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Tim McMillan because, I've mentioned things came out piecemeal. Well, he put out some great pieces. In fact, it was, he mentioned this BASS report, this 10-month report, and in it, he described some of the contents. He said it was a 494-page book. Well, one of the things that caught Roger's eye was that it mentioned a STAR team report from MUFON. And so that's connected with what I mentioned was in the original New York Times article. That locked everything together. So we said, well, together, Roger and I started sending emails to all the people that have been involved at MUFON at the time. He said, well, can you tell us about this STAR team report? Because it was mentioned of a landing case. We wanted to find out what that case was.
And if we're going to talk about that, I can hear that music. We're going to go to break. I'm Erica Lukes here with Curt Collins, Blue Blurry Lines. We will be back.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the airport. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to UFO Classified. Again, I'm grateful to all of the people that support the show, that understand that this isn't all love and light and rainbow and unicorns. I wish it was, because it would certainly create a lot less stress in my life and for those people that I care about. But unfortunately, over the past few years, I've uncovered some things and have been talking about issues that other people have been raising, and unfortunately have kind of been brushed aside because a lot of true believers don't want to look at the facts. And as a result, we have a lot of corruption in this field, and we have a lot of chances where the intelligence community, the powers that be, can get in and maybe do things that aren't necessarily in our best interests. And I think that Skinwalker Ranch is one of those places. I question Bigelow and some of the narratives that have been put forward about Bob Lazar and Area 51 and some of these things. And I personally feel that they're all red herrings and huge distractions, and we need to be looking at what's really going on. My guest this evening is Curt Collins. He has a really incredible blog. It's called Blue Blurry Lines. He just co-authored an article about the Pentagon UFO program's secret partner, in which he worked with Roger Glazell, who's a researcher for the Swedish quarterly magazine UFO at Kult. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but it was worth a try. But he's also, Roger has done a lot of good work, and I appreciate that. We've talked a lot about the different papers, the 5 papers that were asked by Bigelow from the people involved with MUFON, and then also, now switching into the 38 DIRDs that came out. Lots of interesting things. But Curt, we were talking about NIDS personnel and some of the leaks and different things. Let's continue where you were going.
Well, okay, so NIDS. Well, one interesting thing is about NIDS was that at the same time all this was happening, NIDS had been. It was John Alexander who had reached out to the FAA and said, "We'd like to handle the FAA's calls about UFOs," and he and Bigelow and I think Colin Kelleher. Is that how you say his name? Kelleher.
Yes, it is Kelleher. Yep.
Okay, they meet at the FAA offices and make their pitch, and they say, we can take this. You don't want UFO business anyway. We'll take the calls and require no funding. And so the FAA was glad to be rid of the headache. They didn't want to be in the UFO business, and so they listed NIDS as one of the places that a pilot could call. I think they had some other UFO organizations at the time, and I think later it was solely NIDS. And then when the contract came out, they came back. Bigelow's people came back and said, "Can you change this to Bigelow Advanced Aerospace, Space Studies?" And they did. So BASS was the place to call, and it was on there for many years. And so that was in the 2008 time frame. And so what BASS was doing, we were talking a little bit about this earlier, the team of 50 scientists, and allegedly there were laboratories being built. And I'm a bit skeptical of that, especially the way you've characterized the penny pinching behavior of Robert Bigelow. I'm not sure that he had separate facilities and did things like that. But there were a number of interesting things in that, and so he did have some field investigators. The other thing he wanted from MUFON, though, and we should talk about this, besides the field investigations, and that was a really big part, was access to their database. MUFON has, and I know you know this well, and maybe you should describe it, the case management system.
Yeah, the CMS, that's where, the CMS is interesting because you get sightings reports that go into the CMS administrators, and they can deem, where they funnel reports, whether they're going to make it to the state directors or the STAR team, or how things are going to play out. And so CMS is a really interesting and controversial a thing. And as I found when I was state director for Utah MUFON, there were definitely times when cases were put in there that were eventually just either deleted or moved to a place where nobody could see them, which is strange to me. And also I noticed or was informed that several of my cases, that the dispositions were changed on certain cases and also on Elaine Douglas's cases, which I found very interesting. So lots of funny business going on with the MUFON CMS.
Well, with this, see, I've only seen the one side of it that's available to the public, but a non-MUFON I guess, well, not member, that's not the word I want, participant, a non-field investigator, a non-state director, can go in and you can look up case numbers, you can look up by location, but you're limited. And then you, as a insider, a state director, you've got, information to witness names and things like that?
No, you do, and that's the thing I think that was so concerning during the Carpenter affair and during the time when Bigelow purchased the MUFON database. I mean, he got it hook, line, and sinker, everything, all of people's personal details. And I want to just throw this out here because I've had Phil Leach, who worked for MUFON, on my show before, and he brought up a pretty concerning point that there were certain state directors and field investigators that were interviewing witnesses and getting all of their medications. And I mean, all sorts of fun things. And they were putting everything into a database that we clearly know is not secure, and where we clearly know the information can be bought and is bought and sold, which is very disturbing.
Well, this, getting back to Bigelow's involvement in this, so he wanted access to this case management system, and to the same level a state director or someone like that would have, except now there was a limitation. It would be read only. Supposedly they weren't able to enter and manipulate the information, but they had access to this sensitive information like the witness names. And at that time, MUFON put a third-party option agreement so that a person could say that this information will be shared to help investigate your sighting, supposedly with scientists and labs and things like that it could be sent out. Well, that's what people thought was happening, but it was going to Bigelow's company and possibly on to the government. And I don't think very many UFO witnesses would be comfortable with that arrangement. I mean, it's almost, ufology is almost founded on the premise that the government is the bad guy that's hiding information, that's prohibiting progress. And whether that's absolutely true or not, it's a genuine concern amongst many witnesses and researchers. And having the government access to this kind of information is, well, it makes the top of my head come off. I don't know how you feel about it.
I agree. I think it's concerning, and I think especially when you look at some of the backgrounds of the people involved with Bigelow. I mean, you've got people that have alleged links to Sidney Gottlieb, who was the mastermind of MK Ultra and other things. I mean, there's lots of reasons why I wouldn't want my information with regard to some things like this being bought and sold. So it's highly disturbing. There are lots of ethical and probably legal issues that would come into play, I would imagine.
Well, speaking of those, and this may not be interesting to people. They would rather hear about UFO cases, and I understand that. But how this happened is, we knew all along that a lot of this happened. We didn't know why, and that the government was involved. So, we're having to go through and examine some UFO history with a new set of eyes to know, how this happened, what was involved, and what else is going on. But you mentioned the ethics, so there were a couple of other concerns there. And, we talked about the invasion of privacy of the witnesses. Also, the field investigators were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. and subjected to background checks. And ordinarily, say a MUFON investigator, why would you need to know about their citizenship and country of origin? Well, MUFON might need to know that, but the government wanted to know it. And so anyone applying for a position had to give that information and be sworn to secrecy. And, that's just, that's a bit shady in my opinion.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
The other thing was, and in the information that is surfaced, and what we're going kind of out of order in the story, but there's really no other good way to discuss it than point by point. So all this is supported by documents from the MUFON Bass transactions, the actual contracts between them, what was the material that was requested. There's also a series of emails, some of which had too much personal detail. We do have a fragment of those in the collection of documents that's in the article. But one of the things that we didn't put in there that's worth discussing is that MUFON board members were discussing whether MUFON's nonprofit status would be affected by taking this contract with Bigelow for the amount of money involved. And their justification was A, we need the money, and B, this money will be used for UFO research, so it's okay. Now, I don't know what a tax lawyer says about that. I understand the rationale, but I don't know if that's legal, if it's correct, or even ethical.
I would wonder, and I know that Elaine Douglas was looking into some interesting issues with regard to the taxes and MUFON and Bigelow, as you know. So yeah, these are all really interesting issues that you're bringing up. Thank you.
Well, just to reflect on that for a second, the entity that grants an organization like MUFON a nonprofit status on the basis of being an educational group, that's the U.S. government. And the money that MUFON was receiving, although channeled through Bigelow, was government money. So that's something, I can't comment on how legal or proper that is, but that's something, a lot of this stuff is not going to matter to civilians or the non-UFO crowd. But one thing they do care about is money and how the government's using it. And there's some strange happenings here. And not only the fact that the money was used, we want to know, what was that money really buying? And what is this really for? Aerospace propulsion? Was this to develop UFO-like aircraft? Or was it, what the program name suggests, weapons development? And there's, unfortunately, we've shed light on a lot. I feel like what we've done here with this MUFON Bass, we have previously a chapter that was torn out of the book, and now we have that, but there are other pieces missing. And with this, I think we can build on this and get some of the other participants to talk, either on the record or off the record. We can slowly chip away at this and maybe put the story together.
I hope so, because this is a really critical story for people to understand. And, we talk a lot about disclosure, and a lot of the new people that are out there with blogs and doing all these things are, promoting the powers that be that are still the same players that have been involved in this for decades and have been steering the narrative and benefiting from funding to contractors and things like that. And it's like, this isn't disclosure, folks. I'm sorry. It really isn't. This is a distraction. This is a red herring. This is manipulation of our belief systems. I wish it was, because I do believe that there is something very genuine that deserves to be studied. And I know that, there's no doubt in my mind, but it's just the whole thing is just baffling to me. And I want to say too, because I was, you were talking about some of the facilities that potentially could have been built that actually were by Bass. And I want to throw this out there. You've got a real estate mogul who is potentially buying property, lots of property. And, is he buying prime property? What are the implications to that? What kind of breaks is he getting? Are there connections with Harry Reid and some of the other people that got the $22 million? I mean, I think if you really go back and start looking, the connections between these people goes back a long, long time, and there's much, much more involved with this than actually the study of UFOs. So let's be real on that. There was a Bass lab that was built, Pama Lane, near Eastern and Sunset Avenue, near the McCarran Airport, that was built but never occupied. It was a complex of several buildings, Pama Lane, and was called this after its location on Pama Lane. And that was built, and I'm just reading my notes here, the Bigelow Aerospace staff had to guard the empty buildings, and it was sold around 2017. So there you have it. There you go. There's a little tidbit of information for you.
Yeah. Now, see, I didn't know about that, but okay. Well, let's continue moving through the timeline and show how things fell apart, and then we'll come back and kind of examine some of the pieces. So this MUFON arrangement with the $56,000, MUFON apparently loved it. They had good gear, they had little patches and insignia, looked official, and apparently were operating. And over the course of this, the contract was for 1 year. There were about 69 cases that the STAR team investigated that went on to Bass. And some of those Bass jointly investigated. Some of them, there were materials for them to investigate. But at some point, Robert Bigelow became disenchanted, and he cut their monthly funding by half. And then, as things, there were hopes that would be restored. I don't know, exactly what was going through their minds at that time. But then, when January 2010 came, when the contract would have been renewed, which was what MUFON fully expected, it was terminated altogether. And that meant that all the people and all this infrastructure that MUFON had developed crumbled, and they had become financially dependent on Bigelow. The whole STAR team, people that were salaried, were then reduced to volunteer status, and I think anyone can understand that would make some people very unhappy. So they were out of jobs, and so MUFON, which was financially struggling before all this, they had put all the money into producing product for Bigelow. They didn't have enough to save for a rainy day and pad their bank account, and that's what Bigelow demanded. He wanted every dollar to show results. So basically, the breakup was over the way the money was spent. Bigelow thought it was improperly used or inefficiently used, and shut them down. So then he continued with Bass, and I think it was also about this point that team of 50 that I told you about, that was slashed to the bone, and I think the upper management, Colm Keller and at least one other senior management, and hung on whether or not they were technically still part of the Bass or in the main Bigelow Aerospace. And as I said all along, that I don't know what the real distinction is beyond securing that contract. I think it was an artificial contract just to get that contract. So the MUFON investigators were out of a job. The scientists and investigators that Bigelow had hired for his team, they were out of a job. All that remained during that time were the studies that were being farmed out, the DIRDs that we mentioned earlier. Those were produced, that was turned in, and the Pentagon, the official statement they have is that they were of limited value. They didn't renew the contract. So OSAP at that point basically came to an end. And by this time, Luis Elizondo had joined and became he took over from Lukatsky as director, but there was really nothing left except a network. And from what I understand, it continued as sort of a portfolio, not an actual program. And he coordinated with some people, got reports from the Navy, for example, for UAP cases, but it wasn't the way the New York Times story described it. You would think that you had an office with, maybe 12 investigators, or, who knows. It was so indistinct, but you would be led to believe the Pentagon program was of some real substance, but it was headed by Elizondo, and I don't know and he was doing it part-time, so the other people couldn't have been doing it. It would be illogical for them to be doing it full-time. So it was a really small project, especially after the Bass element. That was the meat of it originally, and it had a military, Dr. Lukatsky, he would receive the information. I probably give them some feedback, but all the real structure of it was the Bass contract. And so after that, we're basically left with a ghost of ATIP of what had gone before, and then it whatever funding it may have had dried up in 2012. But Elizondo says that continued on at least an informal basis after that, and he insists that something goes on today, even though it may not be called ATIP.
And it's really, all of this is so interesting, and I wonder if, even though the money dried up, and I know that George Knapp and certain people like to blame the Collins elite, this ultra-conservative, or Harry Reid is on record saying that the Collins elite is this ultra-conservative fundamentalist group that cut off the funding, but I really question that, and I'm beginning to dig into that a little bit more. So there's some interesting elements to that. And I just got a note from Chris Marks, my husband, who's sitting right here listening to the show, saying that he and Colm were the last two people to receive paid checks from Bass around 2015. So interesting things. We've got a lot more to talk about. I will be back with Curt Collins from Blue Blurry Lines after the break.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
With Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Vegas, baby! Vegas' #1 source for talk and new music.
How cool is that?
1 million miles till midnight. A story of timelines, artificial worlds, simulated races, and the galactic imprint, and the destiny of a blue world called Earth. 1 million miles till midnight, written by Solaris Blue Raven, is a journey through the mind's eye which allows the reader to surf a wave of technological and multidimensional intellect, revealing a bridge between conscious design and the truth. A multidimensional bleed-through awakens the world of artificial intelligence to set sail into the frontiers of a vast multiverse, morphing planets and terraforming ascended worlds beyond the linear programs of a fated race. 1 million miles till midnight will awaken, inspire, prepare, and enlighten one to the many multidimensional states of consciousness and worlds we reside in. With every cell and atom, we are this truth and multiverse. 1 million miles till midnight. Written by Solaris Blue Raven. Available now at Amazon.com. Don't wait. Get your copy today.
There is a world outside that which we live in. A realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix. The Paradigm Matrix. Hosted by Willie Miranda. Every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us.
even now in this very room.
The 1 hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole.
The Paradigm Matrix
Explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
Alien Deceptions, a suspenseful sci-fi romance thriller by Tina Marie, featuring the tantalizing Erica Jones and the mysterious Russell Hamilton. An out-of-this-world book of fiction based on years of document facts and files the government does not want you to know about. At least, not yet. Alien Deceptions by Tina Marie. Available now at Amazon.com or get a signed copy at TinaMarieEntertainment.com. Get your copy now.
1, 2, 3, 4!
You are listening
to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
I love the way it sounds. Love the music. Oh, I listen to it.
The future of radio is here and now.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to UFO Classified. Oh, there are lots of interesting things taking place. I want to, first of all, just wish all of you to be safe and to be healthy. This is a very strange time that we're living in, and hopefully you've got your toilet paper. I want to give it just a toilet paper update just for fun, but we actually scored 100 rolls of toilet paper the other day. It was like the seventh sign of the apocalypse, that and the earthquake, and I don't know, it's a strange time. But anyway, I just have to kind of laugh and smile because strange things are afoot, and I wish the best for all of you. Please be safe and be smart and be kind and caring to people that need your help. I am here with Curt Collins, who co-authored an article on Blue Blurry Lines, and that it is entitled The Pentagon UFO Program's Secret Partner, and I hope there will be more to come on this, and I appreciate the really solid research that you guys have taken the time to do, because this is important. And I think you can get little bits of information that puts together the larger piece of the puzzle, and that is really, really critical, especially at this juncture in the UFO narrative. So again, thank you, Curt, for doing that.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you having me on, and I wish Roger would do radio to help with the story, but he is, I guess, microphone shy. So, I'm not great at it, but I'll do the best I can.
Oh, you're amazing. Thank you.
Now we've, there's so many things. It's hard to work everything out. So I hope everyone read the article. But one of the things I forgot to mention was, so during this financial dispute, James Carrion was under fire from Bass, and John Schuessler, that we talked about earlier, he basically threw Carrion under the bus and went behind his back and communicated with Bass. And Carrion already he had a business to run. The MUFON director position was something he did in his spare time, which took a lot of it. And he had a young son, and you got family, you got business, and he wanted to actually reduce the amount of time and change it so that he wasn't. I think he wanted to move from being international director to being something like operations instead. So he wasn't managing people and money and everything, to sort of do things in segments. Well, that never happened. And then when this happened with the going behind his back, he was furious that the board of directors and John Schuster had done this. And at that point, he immediately resigned. So, and this was all essentially over bookkeeping disagreements and things. As best we can tell, there's no actual money missing or misappropriation or misuse of funds or anything like that. But it had to do probably more with impatience, Robert Bigelow's attitude, the pressure he put on his own employees. Anyway, it was an ugly breakup, and so that happened. The whole program was shut down, and MUFON was broke, embarrassed, and under a non-disclosure agreement, so they couldn't tell the public why they were in this terrible shape. And so, I think it was for MUFON. It was maybe they had starry eyes. They took a deal that was too good to be true, and then it really backfired on them, and it set them back. It did a lot of damage to them personally. I don't know if it damaged ufology in general, but it was a black eye. And until the New York Times story, we had no idea, no proof that it was the government behind all this that set this in motion. And one thing I said in the article, I said that if, and I didn't want to speculate, but if this had been intentional sabotage, it couldn't have been any more effective to hurt MUFON, to inflate them with all this activity and money and to suddenly withdraw it. It virtually crippled them. And it was that disastrous.
And that is really, the whole thing is very interesting. And I want to just go back to, because you had mentioned, we were talking about the MATE team, and I want to, just focus and say this did consist of Dr. Robert Wood, who was a big proponent of the MJ-12 documents, which is, that is another story in and of itself. Charles Maudlin, Chuck Maudlin, Robert Powell, and Chuck Reaver. And so I think it'd be interesting to definitely reach out to Robert Powell, Chuck Reaver, and Maudlin to get statements on that. Have you tried to do that?
We have. We tried all participants, and when we first, the first inquiry with Robert Powell was just about the MUFON report, the STAR team thing that I mentioned, and he said, "Well, I can't talk about that. You'll have to talk to Jan Harzan or James Carrion." And at that point, I said, "Well, he doesn't want to talk," but Roger has had a little better. Well, it's been a contentious relationship, but he's had more of a relationship with Robert Powell. And he said, "Well, I'm gonna try again." And so he went back and he got a statement, and it's going to be in our second article. And Robert Powell said that he was part of the MATE team, but he can't discuss the work that he did for Bigelow because he's still under an NDA. So he at least admitted his involvement, and we did get. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I just had to gasp there on the air because gosh, would you look at people that have been on Bigelow's payroll and have done things for them? I mean, that in and of itself is something. So it will be very curious to see what Robert Powell has to say. I'll have to reach out to them and see if he wants to come onto the show, especially since he now is part of the SCU, where I think Hal Puthoff spoke last year.
That's right, and well, we should, and I mentioned this in the article. Now he is no longer with MUFON. He had a break. I think there were already some strained relationships about the direction of the organization, but he and Rich Hoffman and some of the people who were in SCU and probably some others, their breaking point was when MUFON put on this secret space program thing, which was just a little, MUFON's whole, the premise is that it's scientific investigation. Well, this secret space program, there's no evidence to back it up. A lot of the stories are really bad science fiction, and there's nothing that can be proven, there's nothing to be examined. And the promoters of it, like Corey Good, they seem to be more in the entertainment industry and almost like have a cult following. There's nothing in my eyes, nothing legitimate about it. And for MUFON to promote that was too much for them. So Rich Hoffman, they already had this organization that had been set up to investigate a specific case at the request of the witness that didn't want a UFO organization involved in the SCU. And they'd done a paper, and they said, we'll continue our work, but under this organization. And that was how the SCU transitioned into their own organization.
It'll be definitely interesting, and I've always, held Powell in high regard, so it'll be interesting. I'll have to, like I said, reach out to him and try to get him to come on the show, and perhaps Rich Hoffman again, and some people from SCU, because it would be interesting to know a little bit more about all of that. But we just have about 15 minutes left, and so please, continue to give us important information about what your article is telling all of us.
Well, exposing what was known, I think that's key to gathering more information. Ed, I mentioned Tim McMillan's article revealed details. We built off of that, and I think there's more to be found. And now, in our second article, we thought it was only fair. I mentioned we contacted Robert Powell. We attempted to contact John Schuessler, Jan Harzen, all the board members. We received a reply from one person, Tom Dooley, who he replied, I characterized it as courteously, but he didn't want to make a statement on the record. So, but at least he did respond to our request. Others said nothing. Rob Swiatek, is that how you say his name?
Mm-hmm. Yep, Rob Swiatek, yes.
He responded with information about the Star Team case, and he actually found it puzzling because he was unable to find a case that matched what was described, but it was only described in 2 or 3 words. But nevertheless, he made an attempt to find that and did discuss the fact that this Star Team information was shared with Bigelow's company. So it was, he didn't get into we didn't get into him with the mate papers and things like that in other areas. But it was, he's one of the few people that was even willing to discuss anything about the relationship. So now we asked other people. Now I think Luis Elizondo was probably not direct. It may have been. He may have come in at this on the tail end and may not have been directly involved, but he has knowledge of the program. But anyway, we haven't gotten a response from him. Now, Hal Putoff would have, but again, there's no response. But we have attempted, and if it comes in, we're going to publish the second article Monday or Tuesday, and if there is a response, we'll certainly print it as. For a completeness of the record and in fairness to them to give them a chance to respond.
Absolutely, and that is absolutely an important thing to do. And I think, with regard to, and I want to just throw this out there, with regard to some of the articles that have been written by some UFO journalists, it has been funny to see that, and they should learn by your example that you reach out to people when you're going on the record promoting a certain story. You reach out to the other side and get their statement on the record, which has certainly not been done in the case of the weapons testing allegations with Chris Marks, and we saw with the Chris Bartell that some of his statements were used in an attempt to kind of steer the narrative back the other way. So I respect your integrity with regard to promoting or showing all sides and giving the answers, because that's really critical. And when you're doing your due diligence, that's what you do. You report things from both sides. And so I want to just state that for the record, that's critical. So thank you for having that integrity. Where do you see that this is going? I mean, at the end of the day, do you feel that MUFON truly was what it says it was, which is an organization to, investigate UFOs and benefit mankind?
Well, it's I have had my gripes with MUFON for a long time. I've interacted with some people that I thought were top flight. Rich Hoffman, particularly when he was with MUFON, he gave me information and cooperation and I was very impressed with his professionalism. Some of the other ones, Jan Harzen and the previous director, David McDonald, not so much. In fact, I asked him for information on the Cash Lantern case, and McDonald basically told me to Google it. And I thought for a research organization that's supposed to be sharing information, that was a pretty poor response. I thought he should have at least referred me to investigator or a reference, but that was so sad.
That is sad. And honestly, it's like, Google it or pay for a membership. And even if you pay for a membership, you're still not going to get the information.
Yeah, well, I think the stated ideals the organization was based on were great. And you look at the early work, but I think the problem is so many UFO organizations have failed, and for different reasons. Partly like APRO, it was because it was almost run as a dictatorship. In the case of MUFON, they had this the board that's very controlling, and they started off, I think, well, but then you're also have these budgetary considerations. They want people to join. They want to pay for their memberships. They want to attend the symposiums. And I think they cheapen the product in order to appeal to get butts and seats. And there were things like the Gulf Breeze case, where there was, some people maintained that was a genuine series of events. Well, there were also some hoaxes going on with Ed Walters, for sure. Maybe some of his sightings were genuine, but we know that some of them were not. And I feel confident in saying that. I don't know if I could prove that in a court of law, but at any rate, MUFON supported that case. The investigators who questioned it were let go. And when they started treating people like that and promoting cases for their magazine journal, the journal cover, and over things that could be backed up and investigated, and the legitimacy was no longer the prime mover of the organization's thrust.
And it is interesting to note, and I always think it's people should go back and look at the backgrounds of the people who were leading organizations, because you've got Schuessler, who he was an aerospace consultant, as you mentioned, 36 years of service to the U.S. human spaceflight program. He worked for the Boeing company, and then you've got Dr. Robert Wood, who was an aeronautical engineer and had a 43-year career at McDonnell Douglas, managing research and development projects. So you've got people high up with backgrounds. They're working for contractors. And so what is the ultimate end game? And are they truly looking at UFOs, or I think there's some questions that need to be addressed, and people need to we shouldn't be buying what is, put forward and wrapped in a little bow because we want to believe in extraterrestrials or UFOs. And I will say, as I said at the first of the show, I've gone down that rabbit hole. When I first joined MUFON, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and believed that we were all here doing this for the betterment of mankind, womankind. And unfortunately, have learned the hard way that that's not the case. But as I know that you've seen and you have realized and have been trying to report on for a long time as well.
There were so many things to this that I wanted to mention, though, that as far as being who's involved, I don't want to say much about this. I just want to say that it was interesting that Jacques Vallée was involved in these contracts to get MUFON and BASS together. And in the article, we have a picture of him next to Hal Puthoff and John Schuessler, and I've asked James Carrion about this in the second part of the article, and he says that he didn't know that they were involved until he got to the meeting. And I asked him, well, what were they doing? He said, well, it was all about contract negotiations, which seems like a terrible waste of talent for Jacques Vallée to be in on that, because well, brilliant researcher, and has written countless books that they're incredibly insightful. But why was he there, and what was he doing? So,
well, it's all about the data, building databases.
Yeah. I think that was his role. Now we also hear that there were Bass hired French translators for some of the French material from Gaipan, so that was and maybe that went into some of that report. But before we run out of time, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which was the work of Elaine Douglas. Now, we have a section in the second article that's kind of a tribute to her, because she was on the scent of this. She was asking hard questions about Robert Bigelow, and she did suspect the government backing, and she was very much aware of all these, basically the privacy violations that we mentioned earlier. And we talked about how James Carrion sounded like he was a complainer, basically. And maybe, and MUFON tried to make it sound like that Elaine Douglas was a crackpot. But the stuff that she mentioned we have it now. I mean, I feel like we've dedicated this to Elaine Douglas, and we've proven that she was on the right trail. And this, sadly, she died in 2014, and it's taken this long for the proof to come out. But you need to go back and honor her, because she saw what was happening, and she knew it was wrong.
And thank you. And that makes me tear up, because I've always felt such a strong connection to her. And having, I tried when I was the MUFON state director, I tried so hard to learn more about her and the person that had her files. I mean, there were many times when I said, hey, the people working underneath me, I mean, we feel like there's something really wrong here. And to give the people that I'm responsible for, all of us, a heads up, please share what Elaine had on those files. And the person that had her files was just, oh, no, I can't do that it would just put too many people in MUFON in harm's way, and I'm just not going to do that. And I'm just thinking, what kind of ethical human being are you not, that you would not be forthright with research of a woman who went through hell and who was on to a lot of great things, like you say. I mean, and other people are potentially at risk. It's like, it was really pretty despicable. And I know I shared with you on the phone, and I've told my listeners this person reached out to me and offered to finally bring back the Elaine Douglas files, who were actually Elaine, a few days before she passed away, met with the MUFON field investigator Dean Treeley here in Utah, and she begged him to take her files because she was in fear of where they were going to go. And because Dean is a really kind person, he didn't do that. He just couldn't. It was his mentor, Elaine, that was dying. And then all of a sudden, the files are swept up, and the majority of the really good files have disappeared, and the rest of the files are sitting in the black vault that is the MUFON headquarters in California. And when I found out that the files had been taken, in this way from me, and I wanted to get them back and let Dean and people here in Utah build from her work and continue it. I reached out to the board of directors from MUFON, of course, no response. And then also I spoke with Jan Harzan, who said he would be more than willing to give me information on specific things. But of course, he has never done that. So I'm grateful that you're dedicating that to Elaine, because she was a brave, incredibly strong woman who has done a lot for all of us, and she needs to be remembered. So thank you. Thank you. That means a lot.
Well, you're welcome. I'm really glad that we get to discuss it on the show, because, she's, oh, by the way, she was featured on this episode of, it was a nutty show, Jesse Ventura Conspiracy, but he did speak to her briefly, and he also spoke to Bigelow. And it is really interesting to go back and watch that now with this full information. I have a few quotes from that in the article, and so it's a good chance. Probably I don't know if it's been on film many other times, but I do have a link to where you can watch that too. So there's a little bit of information about her. I've got links to some of her work, and we do have some scans of some of her files. Certainly not the full thing, and it is indeed a cruel twist of fate that this lady, who had formed an organization called the Committee to Reform MUFON, that her files are now inaccessible in the hands of MUFON, and that is heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking because that's exactly the last place that she would want them to go. But I think, though, she hopefully understands that there are people like yourself who actually care about preserving her work and moving forward with that, and so that gives me that makes me really, really happy. So thank you. And we didn't even get to talk about Cash Lander, and so I'm wondering if in the next couple of weeks you'll come back on and we can talk about that. Not to put you on the spot.
I will return. Well, how soon? I need to catch my breath, and apparently there's some things still emerging with this, but I would be glad to come back.
Okay, thank you. It has been so much fun to have you on the show, and I appreciate all of you that listen to UFO Classified. You're intelligent. We all want answers, and there's a lot going on right now. So please visit Blue Blurry Lines to read the article that Curt Collins wrote with Roger Glazell, the Pentagon UFO program's secret partner. Have a wonderful evening. Be safe and stick around for a great night on KCOR. I will catch you next Friday.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting